Joe Raiola is the senior editor of Mad Magazine. He is a crusader against unwarranted censorship, comedy writer, producer, director. He has performed in 41 states, and this is his second time in Iowa. And if you like tonight's show, you can check him out tomorrow night in Iowa City. He will be performing his show American Heretic at the Englert Theater. He will be talking tonight about the effects of 9/11 on free speech, banned books, internet filters, and other censorship issues. And in addition to his career in comedy and writing, he might be looking at a future in political consulting. While he's here in Iowa, he would really like to find Michelle Bachmann and offer her the help that he thinks she needs. So if any of you guys have the hookup, let him know. Come talk to this guy after the show. And without any more, here's Joe Raiola.
Thank you so much. Hello, thank you. Boy, I'm excited. A New York guy won't find a happier New Yorker to be in Iowa than me. I'm just so happy to be here. And I heard that Michelle Bachmann was in Des Moines yesterday, and I'm hoping to run into her, but more about that later. I want to just do my usual disclaimer, just in case. I just want to cover myself here. Tonight's program is unrated. Right? It's completely unrated. There's no G, no M, no R, no X, no NC-17, no parental advisory, no parental guidance, no viewer discretion of any kind whatsoever is recommended, encouraged, or suggested. Also, I want everyone here to know that I have not submitted my material for approval, comment, or review to any government agency, industry watchdog group, special interest group, or so-called family-friendly organization. This includes, but is not limited to, the FBI, the NSA, the BIA, the CIA, the DIA, the DEA, the AMA, the EPA, the FDA, the NRA, the ASPCA, the MPAA, the NCAA, AAA, the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the FCC, the NRC, the PMRC, the NAACP, the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, PETA, Planned Parenthood, People for the American Way, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Catholic League, Jews for Jesus, the American Egg Board, the Parents Television Council, the American Family Association, the American Family Foundation, the American Decency Society, the Christian Coalition, and especially those Focus on the Family morons who thought that SpongeBob was gay. I personally don't give a shit if SpongeBob takes it up the sponge. And I did not come all the way here from New York City to discuss with you the sexual preferences and practices of cartoon characters. It is my intention this evening, it is my goal to completely uncensor myself. I reserve the right to speak my mind on any subject and use any word in the English language when doing so. Nouns, proper nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, prepositions, prepositional phrases, conjunctions, and split infinitives. You never know, I may even dangle a participle or two. I make a pact with you. I make a pledge. I promise that I will not say a-hole when I mean asshole. I will not say frickin' or freakin' when I mean fucking. And I will not say the N-word when I mean nigger. You know, ever since Michael Richards went KK Kramer on us a couple of years ago in the Laugh Factory in California, there's been this well-meaning but misguided movement in this country to actually ban the word nigger. Do you know a town in Texas actually passed a law that would make it a criminal offense just to say it? In New York City, liberal New York City, they got in the act. The city council passed a resolution symbolically banning the word, whatever the fuck that means. Hey, Russell Simmons wants it banned from all hip-hop songs played on the radio. And even comedy clubs. Think about that for just a second. Comedy clubs. Places where the great Richard Pryor use that word to expose racism and to fight racism are calling for a ban. I couldn't do this program in most comedy clubs in this country. And the odd thing about it to me is that nigger isn't even the most forbidden word of the English language. The most forbidden word of the English language is definitely cunt. And I will tell you why I say that cunt is more forbidden than nigger. Nigger, the word nigger, whether you like it or not, whatever your feelings are about it, it's worked its way into common usage in the hip-hop community. Where to take the sting out of it, it's used in the familiar sense, as in, hey, nigga, how you doing, nigga? Nigga, please. I can't imagine women adopting that same strategy with the word cunt. Hey, cunt, yes, cunt. You my cunt? Yes, I'm your cunt. Cunt, please. That is not going to be happening anytime soon. And yet, you know, the battle over this word rages on in this country. We now have a new edition of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, published by New South Books in Birmingham, Alabama, a town not exactly known for its racial tolerance. And what's especially new about this edition of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is that the word nigger, which appears in the book 219 times, somebody counted, has been deleted and replaced with the word slave, as if that's some kind of upgrade. But I like to see a little consistency, right? If we're going to take the word nigger in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and replace it with the word slave, then we have to take the word cunt out of Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer and replace that with vagina. Right? And if vagina is too offensive for some people, we can replace vagina with vajayjay. We could call Eve Ensler's play the Vajayjay Monologues. And Herman Melville's Moby Penis. It's weird, this stuff. I mean, I like the logic behind it. The logic behind it is always well-meaning. Censors are always into protecting us what frightens them. The logic is, oh, that word nigger is banned in lots of places. You can't say that word. Schools, they don't want you to say it. You got to teach it. We want more kids to learn this great book and teach this great book. Well, what if you applied that same logic to the world of art and say Michelangelo's David? And you can get the David taught in more art schools if his dick wasn't hanging out. Because there are lots of art teachers who are, you know, they're not comfortable with David's dick. Should we put the David in a pair of shorts? Should we Photoshop out the David's dick altogether and create a dickless David? There'd be a big market for a dickless David, right? Hey, it's a dickless David. I love it. The dickless David is not really the David. If you want to teach the David, you have to deal with the David's dick. It's a package deal, Dick David. And it is the same way with The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It is not that book without that word. Language. Interesting how we all, I say all, the culture, particularly Republicans and Democrats, vying to control language because they know if they can control the language, they get to control the social agenda. We see this all the time, right? What the Republicans, what the Democrats called end-of-life care, Republicans called death panels. Different words for the same thing. What Democrats call a mosque, a community center near Ground Zero, Republicans call a mosque. Fighting for what the thing is called. Class warfare is the one I heard just recently. What the Republicans are calling Obama's tax class warfare. They want to control that language, control the social agenda. But you know what? I have learned from my experience that when you control language, you control a lot more than the social agenda. When you control language, just maybe you control your personal destiny. I went to Catholic school, 1962. A scary time to be in Catholic school for anyone here about my age, as you'll remember, but a scary time to be in any school. First of all, there were several things that were scary about it. The first was every single week, air raid siren. Had to get down on my knees, had to crawl under my desk, and I had to crouch. This is a practice in case the Russians dropped the atomic bomb on the roof of the building, that I'd be okay. This made no sense even then. And it was Catholic school, so there was a particular fear about being in Catholic school. I was frightened of Jesus. Jesus frightened me. I was so scared of Jesus. Because, he was hanging there everywhere. He was hanging in the cafeteria, and he was hanging in the gymnasium, and he had a nail driven between both of his feet and a nail in each of his arms, and there was blood dripping out of him. Someone did not like Jesus. And the worst part about it was, I thought that I was responsible for him dying because, he came back to save my sins. Like, what did I do? Maybe if I had been a better kid, Jesus wouldn't have had to die. Was my thinking. But I didn't know what I'd done. It'd be another 7 years before I started jerking off. I had no idea what I had done. What did I do? And the scary thing about it was that I was going to have to eat Jesus. I didn't think he was going to taste very good, and we weren't allowed to chew him. We had to swallow him whole. I don't know if anybody remembers that. We had to put him in. So I was scared. And it was the time of my first Holy Communion. And it was also the time of my first great First Amendment lesson. I remember going to the principal's office to get the communion uniform. I get the uniform, and as I'm walking back to my classroom, I look through it, and I realize she forgot to give me the communion gloves that go with the uniform. So I go back to the principal's office. Her name was Sister Grace Anita. And I said, Sister Grace, you forgot to give me the communion gloves. And she says, okay. She turns around to get the gloves, I assume. And she comes back at me with a yardstick, a wooden yardstick with a metal tip at the edge of it, and she starts beating me about the flesh, and she's yelling, I didn't forget, you lost it. I'm 7 years old. I yell out at the top of my lungs, fuck you! Stunned the nun. She couldn't imagine that a 7-year-old would know that phrase, let alone dare to say it. It froze the bitch. Froze her. I kick the door open. I tear my ass home. Run to my mother. I never returned to Catholic school. That was the right thing to say at that time. Sometimes you have to say something that's unpopular because you just feel so strongly about it. Then my life got weird. It was strange. And I ended up in public school. I'm in public school. And now, in a way, I feel like I've gone from the frying pan to the fire, and I learned my second grade First Amendment lesson. My third grade teacher is a fat, buck-toothed bitch on wheels named Mrs. Henold. And I don't remember anything about her, really, except that I didn't like her and she didn't like me. She had a big gap between her two front teeth. Unpleasant. And she was teaching us about the letter H. And I had to pick a word that began with the letter H, and I had to write it 10 times. So the word I picked was hell, because that's what it felt like to me in Mrs. Henold's classroom. And I remember writing it down, hell. Yeah, I never knew penmanship could be so much fun. Hell. And you know how third grade works? You know, like the people are sitting next to each other, like you guys are sitting next to each other that close, and I'm writing the word hell down, and it's like the girl next to me, like Charlene Schenectady, is looking over my shoulder. Oh, she's shocked. She sees I've written the word hell, and she turns to over here to you, and it's just write the word hell, and then it turns back to you. And I'm sitting there, and I'm seeing that the word hell is starting to make its way around the classroom. And that it's just a matter of time before it gets to Mrs. Henold. And sure enough, Mrs. Henold overhears someone speaking to someone, whispering, and she calls them up in front of the classroom, and they're talking, and I know that I am being ratted out. So and Mrs. Henold starts walking my way. I gotta think fast. I pick up the pen, and I add an O to each hell. Hello. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you. How you doing this afternoon? You doing? Yeah, nice day. Free speech. There's no such thing as free speech. Always comes at a price. I wasn't willing to pay the price. Not in third grade. I did not want to pay the price of pissing off Mrs. Henold, so I censored myself. Understandable thing for an 8-year-old in third grade to do. I am long out of the third grade, although I wonder sometimes, is America? Is America out of the third grade? Or are we still all metaphorically wondering what the consequences of speaking out in a particular situation might be? I tell you, the strangest things have happened to me. It's been kind of a life path to me. I've been a comedian my whole life. Weird things have happened to me. My previous one-man show was a show called Almost Obscene. And the photo for the show was a picture of me going like this. All right, everybody see? Because it's pretty funny. Almost obscene. It's a visual pun. I'm holding up my ring finger. I'm not quite giving the finger. And when I first did this show, it opened in New York just after 9/11. New York City newspapers writing an article about the show. I get a call from the writer. The writer says to me, listen, my editor has requested a headshot. Doesn't want to run your photo. And I say, well, what's wrong with the photo? And they say to me, well, it's too suggestive is what my editor says. Too suggestive of what? Well, obviously, it's too suggestive of this. But let's stay with the logic here. If I can't do this because it's too suggestive of this, well, then it stands to reason I can't do this either. My fingers were being censored. And this started to happen all around the country. I get hired to do Almost Obscene at the Berkshire Theater Festival in Massachusetts. They won't run the photo. They want a headshot to promote the show. I get hired to do it at the Beck Center of the Performing Arts in Cleveland. They won't run the photo. They want a headshot. I start telling this story. I start integrating this story into the show itself. And I find myself in Kansas. I'm so happy to be in Kansas, right at the center. I mean, I know about Kansas. I know that Kansas is the stupid capital of the country, Topeka in particular. I know that. I get it. I understand that. Alfred E. Newman, Mad Magazine's mascot, was born in Topeka. In fact, no one knows where Alfred came from. He was an advertisement for a painless dentist. It said, "What me worry, painless dentistry," and it showed a picture of Alfred. It's the moron capital of the country. I understand that. I was still happy to be there. A mad editor going to Kansas, it felt good. Topeka in particular. They canceled my show. They canceled the public show. They let me do the show for the staff at the library, but when they found out, someone found out that I was going to be saying something, and they canceled the show. But you don't fuck with librarians. You don't fuck with librarians because librarians, even everywhere, they're passionate about the First Amendment. The librarians would not allow my show to be canceled. They found another venue for me at a university, Washburn University, Topeka, Kansas. And I'm doing the show there that night, and I'm talking about my fingers, and I'm doing this thing with my fingers. And when I go like this to demonstrate the middle finger, someone takes a picture of me. It's a picture of me on stage giving the finger to the audience. And the students at Washburn University dug this, and they decide to write a story about me in their yearbook and run the picture of me going like this. They send the yearbook out to be printed, and the printer looks through the galleys and calls back the student editor and says, "Are you sure you want this picture in your yearbook of this guy flipping the bird?" And the student editor said, "Yes, we do. He was making a very important social point." 2 weeks later, the yearbook comes back to Washburn University, and they have airbrushed out my finger. There's a picture of me going like this, like some bizarre white power salute or something. Uptight. I keep asking myself, well, how did we get so uptight? It's not just America, by the way. I don't mean to just put it all on us. I don't mean to put it all on the Midwest or anything like that, middle of the country. It's the whole country, really. Not just the whole country, the whole world. If you had told me when I started at MAD 25 years ago that I can get in trouble for publishing cartoons, that people would be freaked out about cartoons, that cartoons could get me and hot water of any kind. And I said, you're crazy. No one takes cartoons seriously. But what's threatened free speech more, really, in the last 10 years than the Danish cartoon controversy, right? And that First Amendment thing doesn't necessarily apply to places around the world. And we got involved in that in Mad Magazine, actually. I got involved in it personally. And what happened was I wrote a story for Mad that was kind of religious. It was a satire of religion. It was a spoof of what I think of as the most important theological event in American history, which was the Virgin Mary sighting in the grilled cheese sandwich. Is anyone not familiar with the Virgin Mary sighting in the grill? I see a couple of people shaking their heads. I'm going to go through the details of this quickly because this is an important part of the whole story. There's a woman down south. And for some reason, all these women live down south. And she's made herself a grilled cheese sandwich. And she takes a bite of the grilled cheese sandwich. She takes a second bite of the grilled cheese sandwich. She's about to take a third bite of the grilled cheese sandwich when she looks, and there it's the Virgin Mary is in the grilled cheese right there. She almost ate the Virgin. But she didn't. She takes the grilled cheese sandwich and she puts it in a small, transparent plastic box where she keeps it for 6 years. And she looks at it now and then. And during those 6 years, it doesn't grow any mold. It's a miracle. And she decides finally that she wants to share this sacred object with the world, so she does what anyone who would want to share such a sacred object with the world would do. She offers it for sale on eBay, where it sells for $28,000. I am not making this up. Then she has another idea to sell the holy frying pan that the grilled cheese was cooked in. She puts that on sale on eBay. That sells for $6,000. She gets $34,000 for the partially eaten Virgin Mary grilled cheese holy frying pan combo. And I love this story because I think here's a story that truly reflects the spiritual maturity level of most Americans. And it inspires me to write a story for Mad Magazine called Other Religious Images in Food Currently Available on eBay. And we had stuff in it like the 12 apostles in a bucket of chicken McNuggets. We had Ganesh and Baba Ganoush. And we had Mohammed in a pancake. Mad is printed in 11 countries, 8 languages. And there was a Middle East edition of Mad at the time. That appeared. And we get a call at the Mad Magazine office from a young Pakistani man from Pakistan. And he left a message, and the message said, and I'm basically quoting it verbatim, he said as follows: I'm here in Pakistan reading your Mad Magazine, and I see that you have Muhammad in a pancake. He said it just like, in a pancake. Very indignant, you know. And I'm telling you, we must have listened to that voicemail message like 40 times. Like, you know, smart asses at Mad, like 7 or 8 of us, you know, we're sitting around the voicemail, we're laughing and laughing. Hey, fuck, we got him, you know. And then just suddenly it stopped being funny. I mean, just like that, it stopped being funny. You know, we're crazy, but we're not stupid. We see what's going on around the world. People dying, riots over the pictures of Muhammad with a bomb in his turban. This is serious. And someone says to me, well, what if this guy is a jihadist? And I said, I don't think he's a jihadist because I don't think a jihadist would have called. It was just a hunch. I wasn't based. I didn't think a jihadist would call. But then I'm thinking this through, and again, it's very small comfort in a way because it's still got my name on that article. You know, it says by Joe Raiola right there on that article. And I'm thinking, well, what if they put a fatwa on me? And I don't even know what a fatwa is exactly, but I know I don't want one on me. And I thought that sounds like a blues song, doesn't it? Don't you put no fatwa on me? And it actually is, because a couple of years ago I wrote it. And unfortunately, it's still kind of relevant. Let's try it. That's Bob Dylan. I said, hang on, let's try this again. I said I wrote it about 3 years ago, and unfortunately, it's still relevant. Hang on. This song, it's dedicated to everyone in the Muslim world who is offended by the depictions of Muhammad in the Western media. And it's intended not just as a heartfelt apology, but it's offered in the sincere hope that it will initiate a healing dialogue between comedians and those of the Muslim faith. I put the prophet in a pancake in Mad Magazine. Yes, I did. Oh, but I was only joking. I hope you know what I mean. All right. And although Alfred E. Newman says, what, me worry? I still appreciate it if you didn't put a fatwa on me. Now, it's not that I have anything against fatwas per se. It's just that, well, given my tremendous respect for the primitive beliefs of all the religions of the world, including Islam, I really don't see the point in making me the target of something that would call for as much detailed planning as a fatwa. Besides, it'll take time away from the jihad, which is a big priority now, so please, listen carefully. I feel bad about the Crusades, and I'm against the war in Iraq. I was from the start. And I'm a big fan of Cat Stevens. And I think the Pope is just a hack. You're a hack, Pontiff. You're a hack. And I really want to live my life fatwa free. So I'm asking very nicely, please, don't you put no fatwa on me. Please, 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 please. Oh, praise Allah. You know, I feel so deeply moved that I'd bow in the direction of Mecca now. If I only knew in which direction Mecca was, and I don't want to bow in the wrong direction and get into more trouble, so I will leave you with this. I am very truly sorry, and I hope it's not too late. Oh, yeah. And hey, just for the record, I think Mohammed is great. Hallelujah, Mohammed! So don't you turn me into the next Salman Rushdie. I'm just a comedy writer. Don't you put your fucking fatwa on me. Don't want no fatwa. I said I don't want no fatwa. No, 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 no. I'm a busy man, and I can't fit your fatwa into my schedule at this particular time. So I hope that the Shiites and the Sunnis will finally agree. They get a sense of humor and not to put a fatwa on me. Yeah! Woo! Thank you. Need all the encouragement I could get. Really do. That's heartfelt. There's nothing more dangerous. There's nothing more dangerous for a comedian than to make fun of Muhammad. That's the most dangerous thing. You remember, it was just last year that on South Park that they had Muhammad in a bear suit. Do everybody remember that? They had South Park, they had Muhammad in a bear suit. And as soon as they aired that episode, the lives of South Park creators, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, they were threatened by a group called Revolution Muslim. Even though Muhammad was never actually seen. Remember, it turned out to be Santa Claus in the bear suit. Didn't matter. That episode was immediately censored by Comedy Central, which really shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone here, because Comedy Central, as any fan of The Daily Show knows, censors Jon Stewart every single night. Whenever Jon Stewart uses a word that Comedy Central doesn't approve of, they cut out the audio. In other words, they let us see Jon Stewart say asshole. But they don't let us hear Jon Stewart say asshole. And Jon Stewart, to his credit, he doesn't censor himself. He leaves the censorship to the assholes. And I admire that. I really admire that. I think the greatest champions of free speech in this country, certainly in my lifetime, have been comedians. And it's not so much because comedians are particularly civic-minded. We just like pissing people off and getting into trouble. And I've been thinking about Lenny Bruce recently. Just last week I was at Sacramento State University, and I asked, geez, anyone here not heard of Lenny Bruce? And a bunch of hands went up. People didn't know who Lenny Bruce was. It kind of made me sad. Lenny Bruce, one of this country's greatest champions of free speech ever, a great comedian, was arrested 7 times in 4 cities for violating obscenity laws. Lenny Bruce was arrested for saying the word balls. Okay? He was arrested for saying the word schmuck. He was arrested for making fun of the Catholic Church and sentenced to a year in prison by an all-Catholic jury. All true. Now, I'm a bit too young to remember that, but I do remember when the Smothers Brothers were kicked off the air at CBS around 1970 or 71, supposedly for failing to deliver a script on time, but the real reason was they were making fun of Nixon and speaking out against the Vietnam War. And George Carlin was famously fired from working at a hotel in Las Vegas for saying the word shit. Or as George put it, I was fired for saying shit in a town where the big game is called crap. And, of course, things have changed a lot since then, but it is again, interesting to reflect on what's happening now. The United States Supreme Court has recently made 4 very important First Amendment decisions in the last couple of years. Let's review them quickly. First, the court ruled that videos and movies showing actual violence to animals, not just documentaries about dogfighting, even these so-called fetish crush videos, which show women wearing high heels actually stepping on live gerbils, that's protected under the First Amendment. American gerbils were unanimously against this decision. Then you got the court ruling in Citizens United that corporations have the same free speech rights as individuals. The court also ruled that the hate speech of the Westboro Baptist Church, the morons who hold up the signs that say thank God for dead soldiers and protest military funerals, that's protected by the First Amendment. And recently, just in June, the court ruled that gruesomely graphic, violent video games are an art form, also protected by the First Amendment. So again, let's quickly review. The Supreme Court has ruled that the First Amendment now applies to animal torturers, soulless corporations, hate mongers, and manufacturers of gruesomely violent video games. The First Amendment now seems to apply to everyone except comedians. Radio stations still are not allowed to play George Carlin's shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits routine. Why? Because that's indecent. Indecent? Indecent compared to what? Grand Theft Auto? Doesn't what George Carlin have to say about language and how we use it have as much social relevance as Gerbil's snuff films? And again, it's interesting to reflect on how this culture has evolved or not since 1971 or 73, I don't remember the year, when George Carlin's shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits routine was aired on the airwaves of WBAI in New York City. One person in the entire country complained. And that case went to the Supreme Court. And in 1978, the Supreme Court ruled by a vote of 5-4, one vote, that shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, tits was indecent. Now, we all know that you can hear all 7 of those words on television and radio if you have a premium service like HBO or Showtime or satellite radio. In other words, you can get free speech if you pay for it. Otherwise, so sorry, no free speech for you. And I actually had the experience of coming to a kind of a cross-section of American culture not that long ago that had to do with George Carlin, who's my comedy hero, and the Westboro Baptist Church, and they are not my heroes. I was invited to the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, which was posthumously awarded to George Carlin a couple of years ago at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And as my taxi cab pulls up to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., I see a bunch of people outside protesting. And at first, I don't think anything of it, just a bunch of guys protesting in Washington. And I take a look, and it's the Westboro morons in person. They're out there in person. They're holding up signs that say, "God hates George Carlin." Oh, George would have loved that. He would have loved that so much. I was so sorry he wasn't around to see that. And, of course, I wondered at the time, well, how do they know that God hates George Carlin? I'm not saying that he doesn't, but how did they know? Did God did send him an email? Did he poke them on Facebook? Did the Holy Spirit drop in during their Sunday pancake breakfast? How do they know? And again, the Westboro guys are from Topeka, Kansas. They're from Topeka. Oh, no, we're back to Topeka again. And my favorite part of my encounter with them was this. Let me see if I got this somewhere. I have a souvenir. I got a souvenir here. When I was there, I somehow got my hands on the press release that the Westboro Baptist Church put out to promote their protest of George Carlin. I got to read a little bit of this to you because this is really good. Headline: God hates the late atheistic comedian George Carlin. Yes, he made huge money as a potty-mouthed mocker of God and the Bible and a stalwart promoter of all things morally filthy, such as fags and fag enablers. I think a fag enabler would be a fag. Seems redundant to me, but I'll continue reading, shall I? Now, he is suffering fire and brimstone torments of the damned in hell, just as God promised repeatedly in the same Bible George Carlin so often trashed. All of his friends in the despicable entertainment industry who plan to honor him with the Mark Twain Award will soon join George Carlin and Mark Twain in hell. Oh, no! Mark Twain's in hell, too. I had no idea. I guess that means Thoreau is there and probably Walt Whitman. He was gay, right? He's definitely there. And I kept thinking, well, there are worse things than being in hell. They could be in Topeka. Religion, what religion does to people's brains is interesting to me. It's always the relationship between religion and censorship. I'm doing a show tomorrow night at the England Theater in Iowa City called American Heretic. I thought maybe I'd stretch my First Amendment muscle just a little bit this evening and do a little bit about that, a little bit from that show, because I'm thinking about that theme now about religion and morality and censorship, and it kind of it makes me think of Michelle Bachmann, and I've been so looking forward to being here in Iowa. I know Michelle Bachmann was in Des Moines on Tuesday, and I really did want to meet her because I really did want to try to help her. My opinion about Michelle Bachmann has really changed in the last month. I used to think that she was just a fucking idiot. That's all I thought of her. What else could you think about a person who said that the founding fathers worked tirelessly to end slavery, and said that the Battle of Lexington took place in New Hampshire, and just last month said that she was worried about the rise of the Soviet Union? She sounds like a fucking idiot. It's not about politics. She just sounds like a fucking idiot. So that's what I thought that she was. Until she made the comments about that God sent a hurricane up the northeast coast to warn Washington to rein in federal spending. Then I realized this woman is not just suffering from mere idiocy. This is something much more serious. This bad religion has warped her brain, rotted her brain from the inside, and rendered her incapable of rational thought. Because just think about all the insane beliefs you have to come to the conclusion that she came to. First, you have to believe in God. Okay, let's not call that insane. 92% of Americans believe in God. Then you have to believe that God is aware of America, that God knows about America, which he might not. Maybe he's concentrated on some other sector of the universe. But okay, let's assume that God knows about America. Then you have to believe that God cares about America. Just because he knows about it, he might not care about it. I know about Charlie Sheen, for example. I don't give a shit about him, but I know about him. So we have to believe in a God. We have to believe that God knows about America, that God cares about America. Then we have to believe that God cares particularly about the American economy. As opposed to rhythm and blues music or rap, God is concerned about the American economy. Then you have to believe that God is not only concerned about the American economy, but God thinks that the federal government is spending too much money. Then you have to believe that God wants to express his opinion to us that the federal government is spending too much money. Then you have to believe that God has decided to express this opinion by sending a hurricane up the northeast coast that kills 20 people and wipes out towns and ends up costing the federal government billions of dollars in repair and emergency services. If you believe all that, you shouldn't be holding public office. You should be fucking institutionalized. Right? You should be institutionalized. Isn't there a 12-step program for batshit Christians? Something? Do you have any friends in this state who can help her? I'm concerned about her. I'm not angry. I'm worried about the poor woman. It's weird, what happens with, people get so sensitive. I'm going to come back to language and religion. There are 3 terms in America I'd like to share with you. 3 terms that to me are the kind of meaningless bullshit terms in America now that are used continually. They're used over and over again and no one questions them. The first term is sacred ground. Sacred ground. I hear a lot about that in the debate. I'm from New York City. I watch the World Trade Centers burn from my kitchen window. And that debate has been going on now. Sacred ground. A lot of people say you can't build a mosque near ground zero because ground zero is sacred ground. And I hear arguments about this. And whenever I hear that term sacred ground used, I have never once heard anybody question the basic premise that ground zero is sacred ground. And I'm not saying that it's not. I'm just asking the question. What is it that makes ground sacred? That people died there. That's what makes Gettysburg sacred, right? That 7,000 soldiers died there. But tell me, if more soldiers died at Gettysburg, would it be more sacred? If fewer soldiers died at Gettysburg, would it be less sacred? And when exactly did Gettysburg become sacred? When the battle started? Or when the first soldier died? Or when the last soldier died? I'm just asking. I have the same questions about Arlington Cemetery. What makes it sacred? And is the degree to which Arlington Cemetery is sacred based on how many people are buried at Arlington Cemetery? And is it more sacred because that there's soldiers buried there as opposed to ordinary people? Again, I'm just asking. Let's say your Uncle Phil is riding along the interstate here, and out of nowhere, a meteorite comes shooting out of the sky and smashes into his car, instantly killing him. And you put up one of those annoying roadside graves next to the hole to commemorate the spot where he was crushed to death. Is that now sacred ground? Well, you maybe. Not to me. So is the determining factor in what makes ground sacred just whether it's important to you? Is ground zero only sacred ground if you know someone who died there or to Americans? Jerusalem is not sacred ground to Buddhists. Sacred ground. Personally, I don't think that people dying at a particular place or being buried at a particular place makes ground sacred. I think that all ground is sacred or that no ground is sacred. And I personally take the point of view that all ground is sacred because it's alive. Looking for sacred ground? Start with the ground beneath your feet. But the term sacred ground has become just a bullshit term used to promote a particular political or social agenda. That's what it become. Same thing with traditional marriage. Traditional marriage. Now, Iowa, this state is ahead of the curve. This state is major ahead of the curve, and you would not expect this red state in the middle of the country to be ahead of the curve on this issue. But there are a lot of people in this country, a lot of people in this state who love to tell us that they're big supporters of traditional marriage. Well, if they're such big supporters of traditional marriage, then how come they're not supporters? How come they're against polygamy? Because in the Bible, marriage is traditionally polygamous. Men were allowed to have as many wives as they could fuck. It's true. Lochmid had 2 wives. Abijah had 14 wives. Rehoboam, whoever the fuck he was, had 18 wives. King Solomon had 700 wives. Quite an accomplishment in the pre-Viagra age. Hey, how come people who say they support traditional marriage, how come they're not in favor of prearranged marriage? Because marriage is traditionally prearranged by family. Your spouse, not that long ago, your spouse could be chosen for you while you were still a fetus. And remember, there's no divorce allowed in traditional marriage. You're fucking stuck with each other whether you're fucking or not. Right? And traditional marriage isn't about love. Traditional marriage is a business transaction. It's about the man's social status and the woman's dowry. So these right-wing blowhards who love telling us how much they're in favor of traditional marriage are actually full of traditional shit. What they're in favor of is convenient, romantic, heterosexual marriage with an easy, no-fault divorce option. And the only thing that's traditional about that is that it excludes gays. The phrase, I'm a supporter of traditional marriage, now actually means one of 2 things. I'm a homophobe and I worship a homophobic God, or I'm queer and I just can't admit it. Bullshit term number 3, American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism. I hear this a lot. Newt Gingrich is a big promoter of American exceptionalism. According to American exceptionalism, America is qualitatively different from all other countries. In other words, we're better than anyone else. And the thing that separates America from all other countries is that our rights are not given to us by the government, but our rights come to us from God. Well, let's go with this logic for a minute. If our rights come from God, then how come the Bill of Rights isn't in the Bible? God doesn't grant us the right to free speech. God doesn't grant us the right to bear arms. God doesn't grant us the right to freedom of assembly. God doesn't even grant us the right to freedom of religion. We have to worship him or we're cosmically fucked. So whenever I hear some idiot like Newt Gingrich pontificating about American exceptionalism, I want to ask him, by what lofty criteria have you come to this conclusion that America is exceptional? For example, do we have the best educational system? Well, the American school system among developed countries of the world is actually ranked 18th. Do we have the lowest infant mortality rate? No, we're ranked 28th. Do we have the highest life expectancy? No, we're ranked 36th. Do we have the best health care system? According to the World Health Organization, the American health care system is ranked 37th in the world. Well, are we the happiest people? Well, according to a recent Gallup poll, ranked the 10 happiest countries in the world, and guess who didn't make the list? Well, are we number 1 at anything? Well, yeah, we are. We have the most serial killers, we have the highest obesity rate, and we watch the most television. Look, this is disappointing. I understand that it's disappointing, but I'll tell you, I think America is a lot of things as a nation. I don't think exceptional is one of them right now. But the big problem is if we think we're exceptional now, we'll never be exceptional. Because if we think we're exceptional now, we're actually delusional. But there are some great things about this country. And there are some things about this country that I love. And one of them is that I could stand up here tonight. And that there is this principle, this ideal, stated so beautifully in the First Amendment. For a comedy writer, it's absolutely a must. It's absolutely a must. And in a lot of countries in the world, I couldn't be doing this. So for that is one of, probably nothing makes me prouder to be American than that one thing. And just quickly, before we get to the slide part of the program, I want to tell you that I really didn't give much a damn about censorship for many years. But I got interested in censorship when I started to work for Mad Magazine and started to learn the history of Mad Magazine, because Mad Magazine was created by Bill Gaines, one of this country's first great champions of First Amendment speech, of free speech rights. And Bill, some of you may know this, Bill was the creator and the inventor of the American horror comic. He created Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Terror and all those comics that were very edgy in the 1950s and went on to become HBO shows, many years later, and that were considered edgy even then. But the thing about the 1950s that you have to keep in mind is that the 1950s was a paranoid time kind of like this. We weren't worried about jihadists, but we were worried about the Russians, the nuclear threat, the red threat, the communist blacklist. There was a lot of censorship in that era. In fact, comic books, they had to have a comic book code. If your comic book didn't have the industry seal of approval, it could not be distributed. And comic books, in a pre-television age, were considered vile entertainment that was polluting the minds of young adults, making young adults turn to juvenile delinquency. There was a book called Seduction of the Innocent that hypothesized that Batman and Robin were having a homosexual relationship, as if that was news. Wonder Woman was the world's perfect lesbian role model. And the most dangerous comics of all for kids were Bill Gaines' EC Comics. There was a United States Senate committee formed to study the relationship between comics and juvenile delinquency. And Gaines did not wait to be called to testify in front of the Senate. He called them. See, they didn't realize that Bill was crazy. They didn't realize that Bill didn't take orders from anybody, that he was kind of living in his own world in a way. And in 1954, Bill Gaines appeared before the United States Senate, and here's what he told them, in part. It would be just as difficult to explain the harmless thrill of a horror story to some people as it would be to explain the sublimity of love to a frigid old maid. Our American children are, for the most part, normal children. They're bright. But those who want to prohibit comic magazines seem to see sneaky, dirty, perverted monsters who use comic books as a blueprint for their action. The truth is, delinquency is the product of the real environment in which the child lives, not the fiction the child reads. Our problems are economic and they're complex. Our people need understanding. They need affection, decent homes, and decent food. Gaines flies back, probably trains back knowing Bill, to New York. And he calls a meeting of all the comic book publishers to fight censorship. He wants to fight the comic book code. He wants to fight the comic book censorship. And he feels strongly something needs to be done. So here's what they do. They get together and they take 4 words: terror, horror, weird, and crime. I'm going to say them again. Terror, horror, weird, crime. And they decide that from that point forward, those 4 words are going to be obscene. That no comic book will ever be allowed to include those words: terror, horror, weird, and crime. Now, it makes you scratch your head. How did they come up with those words? Why those words: terror, horror, weird, and crime? What was that all about? Well, what they did was they took a word from each of Bill Gaines' best-selling titles: Vault of Terror, Weird, Science, and they essentially outlawed, banned the words. In other words, Gaines' own industry turned on him, and they offered him up to the federal government as a sacrificial lamb. That's the weird thing about censorship. It doesn't always come from out there. The most insidious kind of censorship comes from the ground up. So here is Gaines. His own industry is out to get him. The Senate got government pressure against him. Parents hate him. Psychologists and social workers have no tolerance for him at all. He shuts down EC Comics. Shuts it down, every title except one. And this is The Comedy Writer's Revenge. In 1952, Mad started out as a comic. Wasn't widely read, but it was unique. It was the only comic ever to make fun of other comics. Someone dared to make fun of Disney. Mickey Mouse became Mickey Rodent with pimples and vulgar tongue, and he smoked. No one had seen anything like this before. And 1955, the year I was born, Mad magazine was born. And that word magazine is so very beautiful because as a magazine, Mad circumvented the comic book code. It didn't apply because it was foolishly believed then that comics were for kids and magazines were for adults, and we know better now. So that changed the course of comedy in this history, right up to Jon Stewart and John Colbert, Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart, who are big Mad fans. Mad just changed the voice of satire in this country. I don't say this to blow my own horn. It was the magazine I grew up reading. What I'd like to do now is take you inside Mad. I'll show you some of the things that Mad's done recently, and I'll illustrate some of the First Amendment points I've been talking about, and then if you want to hang out a bit, we'll do a little bit of Q&A. Hopefully this technical stuff will work. Is the projector on? And can someone dim the lights? Can someone dim the lights? Is there anybody here dim them? Well, how bad is it for you guys? Can you see them? Can you see this? Can we make do until someone gets the lights down? Here's the man. Okay. All right, so just quickly on this first part, Bill Gaines' dad, Max Gaines, basically is credited for creating the American comic. This is the first comic book ever published in American history. Legend has it as Max Gaines was cleaning out his attic of the Sunday funnies. Rather than throw them out, he had the idea to put them all in one comic book, and this is it. The first comic ever printed in America, Famous Funnies in 1929. And there is Bill Gaines, who I had the great privilege of working with for a bunch of years. Bill was shaped like a Bartlett pear, looked like a homeless man and kind of a deranged guru at the same time. And there's one of these early EC comics, the shock suspense stories. You see jolting tales of tension in the EC tradition. You see the goon with the hood and the whip in his hand and the damsel in distress. This stuff was pretty edgy in the 1950s. Became pretty commonplace in MTV 40 years later. But this was really on the cutting edge and was scaring people. Center of a lot of controversy in the 50s. And here is the first ever edition of Mad, the comic book, that thing, that slithering blob coming toward us. What is it? It's Melvin, as in it's Melvin Kalsnowski. It's one of the original names of Alfred E. Newman. Alfred, for those of you who don't know, was named after Randy Newman's father, Alfred Newman, who was a scorer of films in the 50s. And here we've got the first ever edition of Mad Magazine. This new magazine is vital for you to read, and inside you'll find an extremely important message from the editors. When you opened it, it said, "Please buy this issue." Now, every president since JFK has been on the cover of Mad, every elected president, that is. You remember the movie The Sting with Redford and Newman? Here's Nixon and Agnew as con men. I joined the Mad staff a couple of months before this. Rambo was the popular movie of the day. Covert actions in South America were going on. Anybody remember when the first President Bush threw up on a Japanese prime minister? It's the highly intelligent Mad response to that. Clintstones, meet the Clintstones. They're America's first family from the town of Little Rock, and the one in charge is Hillary. Hoping they'll be back in 96, praying Bill won't pick up any chicks when you're with the Clintstones. It's a yabba bubba tax time, a drop your slacks time. Looks like a one-term time. It wasn't. I'd like to see him hang this in the Clinton Library. Everybody remembers President Gore, elected legally in 2000. I don't think there's anything that Mad has done in the last 10 years more popular than this, or a spoof of the Star Wars movie Attack of the Clone. This was Clone of the Attack, of course, with the invasion of Iraq. The 46-year-old political version. He's come too soon. We also did a McCain poster. Running the nation. This guy shouldn't even be driving. Just a couple of things I'd like to show you that Mad has done recently. For those of you who haven't seen the magazine in recent years, here is some recent Mad covers and some of the inside contents of Mad. It's our 50 Worst Things About Facebook article. This just appeared on the Mad Comedy blog, which is theidiotical.com, the Rick Perry's Page-a-Day execution calendar. Oh, this is the real John Edwards mugshot, and Mad does the full reveal. I do like that. That just... Now, this is kind of instructive because in Despicable Mel, we're using real quotes from Mel Gibson, things Mel actually said, like, I hope you fucking don't sleep. I hope you fucking waste. You'll note we don't actually spell fucking out. We could actually talk about that later, but I guess you could accuse us in a sense of censorship in that, but Mad generally does not spell out certain words. I'm not sure how much press Anthony Weiner got out here. Everybody know who Anthony Weiner is? He's the guy who tweeted pictures of his pecker, the congressman. I don't know if Tiger Beat's still around. I guess it is, or we wouldn't have spoofed it. Now, every year we do our best-selling issue is the list of our 20 dumbest people, events, and things of the year. I want to just take you through some of the recent years, show you what we've done. Last year, of course, number one was the BP oil spill. Here's Jesus walking on oil. It can't be fun. The Pope made the list, the audacity of the Pope. Thoughts on concealing the Vatican's nightmare. Jay Leno made our list, just when you thought it was safe to say you were the host of The Tonight Show. President Obama made our list, Diary of a Wimpy Prez, for his Gitmo gutlessness. In 2009, our dumb person of the year was this guy, Dr. Conrad C. Murray. Sarah Palin showed up as Blunder Woman. In 2008, anybody remember the pregnant man? Remember years ago there was a guy who was a pregnant man? We actually created a holiday in Mad for him called Father's Day and created a line of cards. I'll read you one. This is my favorite. It's called To a Parent Who Has It All. Dear Mom, you're most unusual, no ifs or ands or buts. The truth be told, I'm awful proud you've got a pair of nuts. And something even bigger than those guys down at the dock. It's really quite impressive, Mom, your giant throbbing heart. The old comedy misdirection. Everybody remember Larry Craig? Senator Larry Craig, going back now to 2007. He was on our list. Michael Vick made our list. It's still kind of hard to believe that the vice president shot someone, isn't it? It's hard to believe. Here's the KK Kramer, Michael Richards. Barry Bonds in The Unnatural. Back in 2005, the response to Hurricane Katrina made our list. That year, Donnie Rumsfeld and the prisoners of Abu Ghraib. The attack of the 50-yard line woman. And maybe my favorite, Dean Scream. Here's a classic Mad piece. This would be an interesting way for the government to raise some money now. This is when the government allows product placement in the Pledge of Allegiance. There's no flag in here, but I'll do it anyway. It would go like this. iPod, Allegra, Tootsie Fab, Fuji United Franco-American, Banana Republic, Ford, Chiclets, Vans, One Nathan's, Wonder Bod, Disney Vagisil, Whisk Listerine, Ban Jergens, Hormel. Martha Stewart dying? Mohammed and a pancake. Now, you got to look hard to see him, but he's there. If you can see, he's next to the Reverend Pat Robertson in a spinach knish. And just underneath Martin Luther in Smart Balance Buttery Spread. So you've got to look, but there he is. It's the last time that Mohammed has appeared in Mad, not since. Here's an ad for the NRA, the Nature's Revenge Association, in which the animals shoot back. There's an interesting story about this. When this appeared in Mad a bunch of years ago, we got about, I'm going to say 500 letters from the NRA threatening to boycott our advertisers at a time that Mad was advertiser-free. Bit of Mad history here. Here's a real ad for an old record club. You get 6 top star tapes or records for the price of 1 with nothing more to buy ever. And the Mad spoof, you get 8 records for a penny when you buy 13 more at club prices. It's like getting 21 albums for the price of 57. Classic Mad piece, first aid for the choking victim. 1, find out what the victim is choking on. 2, don't order that dish for yourself. The real Vanity Fair cover, the Mad spoof. Now, here's a Mad cover that never was. First of all, this is a lousy cover. A good magazine cover should be instantaneous. This is not a good magazine cover because it needs me to explain it to you, and explain it I shall. You'll note that there's a race going on in the background, and it says Marathon Route. And Alfred, such an idiot, he thinks he's won the marathon when he's actually run off course, and he's actually running over a dead body, running over a police line. Again, not a very good cover. We screw up now and then, but we had actually gone to press with this cover, and it was about to be released when 9/11 happened. And we got a call from our printer in Wisconsin who said, "Are you guys sure you want to go to release a cover with your mascot running over a dead body in New York City now?" And we didn't. We had a day to come up with a new cover, and that was it. That was a real tough time to be funny. And it's a big comedy writing community in New York. The Onion's based there, Saturday Night Live, Comedy Central, Mad. And it took a while. This actually replaces something I used to have in this show that was about bin Laden being on the loose. This is what Mad did shortly after he was actually killed. Now, in Mad's history, this is definitely the most censored, most controversial issue of Mad. This came out a long time ago, 1974, and Mad back in those days was sold at the legendary mom and pop shops. This was a pre-Viagra age. And mom and pop shops around the country were largely offended by this cover and would not distribute it, was taken off the shelves. And that doesn't seem to me to be censorship in the strictest sense. You shouldn't have to sell anything that you find offensive. Of course, now in the age of Walmart, it's a lot different when you have one big organization making that decision for a whole town or a whole state. But this was definitely the most censored issue in Mad's history. I will show you a couple of other covers at Mad that you might find to be in bad taste. Alfred pissing in the snow, 1984. Alfred photocopying his ass, getting pictures of his face. Now, this is an interesting bit of mad history. You'll note, I was talking about this earlier today, that these creatures have no genitalia. They have no sex parts. That's the joke. He's got nothing to cover, and Alfred is covering himself when there's nothing, in fact, to cover. This issue was banned in several states around the country, and I never understood why. It just goes to show you it's kind of weird how this censorship thing works. Sometimes it's just in the mind. We never would have imagined that this issue would have been pulled from the shelves in certain places, but it in fact was. Remember when Britney was pictured with no panties on? There was the mad take on that. Here's another Britney Spears cover. Now, Mad, as I said before, printed in 8 languages, 11 countries. We are not responsible for the content of Mad overseas. It's a licensing deal. They licensed the Mad name. They could use our material and translate it, or they could add their own material to it. We would never show a cover like this on the U.S. edition of Mad. Alfred again applying falsies to Britney Spears. Here is a more shocking example of a cover we'd never do. This from the Netherlands. That's the former Pope. And you'll note that there's someone crouching in front of the Pope. I guess we're supposed to believe that that's Alfred E. Newman crouching in front of the Pope, apparently filleting the Pope. Again, we'd never do this in the U.S. edition of Mad, but I show you this just to give you an idea of how the line is drawn differently in different cultures. Here's what we will do. Here's one of the few times in Mad history I can think of full frontal nudity in Mad. Guy catches topless mermaid, brings her home. He's excited. He calls the press. Panel 4, the press arrives. Panel 5, the guy's mother has cooked the mermaid. I show this to you because when it last appeared in Mad, we got about 20 letters from irate parents saying, hey, my kid reads your magazine. This is disgusting. Bill Gaines is turning in his grave. To which we say, well, first, no, Bill is not turning in his grave. He was cremated. Secondly, when this first appeared in Mad, Bill was alive and well. This appeared more recently in Mad as a reprint, and the person was responding to a reprint. Mad is not a quote-unquote kids magazine. A third of our readers are over 30. The average age of a Mad reader is 24. And, of course, we have a large readership of teen boys. If this crosses a line for you, fair enough. Don't get it for your kid. Remember, the Mad message was not so much what me worry as much as it was question authority. And we kind of feel at Mad that we have a pretty positive influence on young readers. This, to me, is the most disgusting thing ever in Mad. The single most disgusting, bad taste thing that Mad has ever run. This is it. It's animated on our television show, which is the #1 rated show on the Cartoon Network, seen every Monday, which is geared really to a younger audience than the magazine. The Mad Cartoon Show is really geared to 10 to 12-year-olds, and the magazine is aimed at a significantly older audience than that. Is Washington cross-dressing the Delaware? The Last Supper with cell phones. I like showing those. Okay. We're getting to the end of this now. I just love this piece of Mad history because it kind of speaks to my own political heart, so I like showing it after all these years. We did this in 2004, and it imagines this speculates that President Bush is running for re-election, and he's running against Jesus. Jesus is running for president against President Bush, and President Bush has to do an attack ad on Jesus. So this is President Bush's attack ad on Jesus, who's running for president. Jesus of Nazareth says, give to him who begs from you, and do not refuse who would borrow from you. Jesus favors more government handouts for welfare cheats. Jesus of Nazareth says, judge not, that you be not judged. Jesus is soft on crime. Jesus of Nazareth says, render therefore unto Caesars the things which are Caesar's. Jesus will raise your taxes. Jesus of Nazareth says, do not resist one who is evil, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. Can we trust Jesus to fight the war on terror? Jesus, wrong on social services, wrong on crime, wrong on defense, wrong for America. I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message. And finally, we have the Mad folding. If you buy it, folks, please, if you fold it, please buy it. The fold-in still being done by Al Jaffe after all these years, and of course the fold-in always has a question and a misdirection. The question here, Al asks on the upper left-hand corner is, what is the most offensive thing you could see on display at a museum? And you see in the picture it's got the Piss Christ and the Virgin Mary with the elephant dung, and people are repulsed. They're literally puking. And the question again, what's the most offensive thing you can find on display at a museum? When you fold it in, the answer is museum closed due to censorship. Okay. Can we get the lights back on? Thank you. Hey, thanks a lot. Thank you so much. We have a mic set up over here. Is this a live mic? I hope it's a live mic. Yes, it is live. So anybody has any questions about anything related to MAD, anything related to First Amendment stuff that I've talked about or something else, step up to the mic and say your name and fire away. Well, not literally. If there are any. Why don't you come on down?
Your age of your
right up against the mic.
okay, your age of your readership is a lot older than when I was reading it. I was like, from my memories of first reading, I was reading Mad Magazine, so I was like in fourth grade, fifth grade, something like that. It was really early, and I got them from my cousins, who were older than I was. And their fathers were all well placed in the Chicago Police Department. They're all Catholics to the bone. So you figure out how they got those. But they gave them to my mother, who was their sister, and then I got them. And I've been reading Mad Magazine for years, you know. And it gave me a completely different view of life than what most people have. And I can make a joke about anything, you know. I can see it, and it's great relief to be able to joke about something, even myself, because I'm usually the biggest target I have.
Well, I'm going to say a couple things about that. First, of course, MAD, when MAD started, its readers were almost all young. Parents weren't reading MAD. What's happened is a lot of the kids who were reading MAD back in the 60s and 70s are now parents, and they still read it, and they turn their kids onto it. So the MAD readership has gotten older. Where it's become much broader now. So you have teens and 40 and 50-year-olds reading MAD, whereas years ago you would never have a 40 or 50-year-old reading MAD. So that has been a definite big change. Also, regarding about you being the butt of your own jokes, there are basically two kinds of humor in the world. One kind of humor is, look at me, I'm a schmuck. What a schmuck I am. The other kind of humor is, look at you, what a schmuck you are. And MAD has always really traditionally is the latter of those actually, I'm sorry, the former of those two. MAD very self-deprecating, MAD cheap, MAD low standards, MAD poor quality. MAD is always boasting about its low standards, its low tastes, etc. So there's always been a kind of a very self-deprecating humor about. It's been intrinsic to MAD, I think. So apparently that's impacted you. I'm not sure if it's been positive or not, but
I'm still alive. One thing you talk about how you can't flip the bird, and I was thinking about how can you get around this little adversity? Why don't you just go like that and let them guess?
Do them both. I haven't tried that so far. So far, I've just got my pinky and my thumb left. So
well, you're telephoning somebody.
You know, I could do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? If you don't want to come to the mic, just shout it out. Yes, sir. I can probably shout out. Well, you're up. Yeah,
I already spent the time. This is tall. I was wondering, what's the origin of Spy versus Spy? That was my favorite.
The origin
part
of Spy versus Spy. Spy versus Spy was created by a guy named Antonio Prohias. We were talking about this earlier today. Antonio Prohias was Cuban, and he was on a death list. Castro put Prohias on a death list because he was a political cartoonist who was doing anti-Castro cartoons. And Prohias fled for his life And he made the crossing. He managed to get to Florida. And then a couple of years later, he ended up at the office of Mad Magazine, and the rest is really a bit of history. Spy vs. Spy was his commentary on the futility of war. The black spy and the white spy, it really wasn't about race. They were dressed differently, one in black and one in white. They were continually inventing ways to just kill each other, and they would never stop no matter what. It was an endless, endless fighting, and that's what Spy vs. Spy was. And it really reflected Prohias's political sensibilities more than anything else. But that's really an amazing story that this guy fled Castro, ended up here, and became a tremendously successful and famous cartoonist with this strip that has endured now for a half century. So, anybody else? Yes. The question is, do I see censorship of books becoming more of a problem? I'm going to say I see it more of a problem now because I think that this edition of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn that's essentially censored, and it wasn't just the word nigger that they deleted in that book. They also deleted the word Injun, and they replaced the word Injun with the word Indian. I think if that edition is successful and it does well, it would stand to reason that there'd be more like it. It would stand to reason that there would be a market for books that were altered, I would say dumbed down, to fit the requirements of a particular curriculum. So I would say that in that sense, it's more of a problem. I'd rather the book not be taught myself. I'd be curious to see if they put out more books along those same lines. But that's a disturbing trend to me. Sir.
When you list your favorite phrases like sacred ground and traditional marriage, my favorite would be if a politician at the end of his speech would say, Allah bless America.
Allah bless America. Well, that would be render that politician immediately unelectable. So I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for a politician to say that. Of course, the tremendously ironic and kind of sad thing about Judaism and Christianity and Islam, of course, it's all the same God. It's all the same God, and those three religions have so much in common, far more in common than they don't. But boy, they have a long history of not getting along. That's for sure. Yes, sir. Well, we still satire religion in Mad, but I will tell you this in all honesty. What I showed you about Muhammad and a pancake was the last time Muhammad's appeared in Mad. Now, about a year after that, someone submitted an article to Mad, an idea to Mad that we had a big fight about. And the premise submitted to Mad was a connect the dots Muhammad. Now, I thought this was brilliant because we're not showing Muhammad. We're not breaking the Islamic code, which is that actually depictions of Muhammad are sacrilegious. We didn't know about that when we put Muhammad in a pancake. So the connected dot Muhammad is brilliant because it does not break that code, but it allows you to connect the dots and then create Muhammad right there. And we had an argument about this that lasted quite a while, as in weeks. And my side of that argument lost. I thought we should have done it. We didn't. The prevailing opinion was, it's kind of a cheap shot. It's not really making fun of the people we want to make fun of. We shouldn't do it. I thought it was wrong that we didn't do it. I thought that it was kind of a double standard. The fact of the matter is, in this culture, it is more acceptable to make fun of Jews and Christians than it is Muslims. That's just a fact. People are afraid. There's a lot of fear. The South Park is a perfect example of that. When they're, refusing to poke fun of Muhammad. No fun, no problem. Christians and Jews in this country are expected to get with the fucking program. This is America. It's the First Amendment. We're allowed to make fun of your religion, and we're going to. And we don't really have that same standard with Islam because there's a tremendous fear about it. And I can understand the fear. It's not such an easy issue. I mean, you know, I will just say about Comedy Central and MAD, they are owned by big corporations. MAD's owned by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers is part of the Time Warner family. You know, there's a fear. There's a palpable fear that someone's going to be hurt. So I get it. It's not an easy issue. And so when Christians point out that there's a double standard, kind of hard to argue. There is. There is. So, yeah, we still spoof religion and we might even spoof particular jihadists or things like that, Bin Laden and MAD, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not very likely in MAD to make fun of Islam the way we are Judaism and Christianity. That's for sure. That's as honest an answer as I can give you. Was there anybody else? Yes, way in the back. Well, I mentioned the Fatwa song does come out of something that is not completely. There was a little bit of fear involved in that. I mean, there's never been a direct threat. I can't say that there's ever been real fear about that, but it does shake you up when you get a call from Pakistan while there are other cartoonists around, while there are riots going on in the world. Definitely does shake you up. That people take this kind of stuff that seriously, and to consider that someone might actually be hurt or threatened or come to harm because of a cartoon printed, no one kind of wants that on their conscience. So it is a factor, and you try to fight against it, but it's an undeniable factor, for sure. I'm going to do one or two more, and then I will gladly hang out if anybody wants to talk to me one-on-one. So, yes, sir. Why did I have to cover the curse words? Why did I have to cover the curse words? I'm not sure how to answer that question. Why did I have to cover the curse words? To me, it's not about so much curse words as much as forbidden words. Here's what I would say to you. If I were up here doing a show about censorship and to speak in euphemisms when using certain words, if I were to be discussing The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by New South Books, in which the word nigger is deleted, and not said that word, said the N-word instead, I would feel like a complete hypocrite. If I'm going to be talking to you about the 7 words that the Supreme Court ruled were indecent, shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits, and I'm going to discuss that case, and I were not to use those words when discussing that case, I would also feel like a hypocrite. Not using those words, to me, just gives them more power, and it falls into that trap of self-censoring, which I don't want to do. So I make the conscious choice to use those words, and I try to use them in a way that is not hurtful. I try to use those words in context, in a way that shows that those words actually can be used in a way that is not necessarily offensive. So that's my intent in using them. And then there's another thing that I just kind of like saying them sometimes, There is that aspect to it. There is kind of a fun in that. Yeah. Is there a line? I love the question about the line. He's asking about the line. The line. You see, the line, it's that line. It's always moving, that line. It's hard to get a handle on that line. No one knows where that line is. And, of course, there are limits to free speech. I think there absolutely are. Here's what I would say to you. Free speech, the First Amendment, is no different than abortion and no different than gun rights. If you were to ask most Americans, do you think abortion should be legal, most Americans would say yes. Abortion should be legal. If you would ask most Americans, should abortion be legal after 8 months, most Americans would say no. If you would ask most Americans, do you have the legal right to own a gun? Most Americans would say yes. If you would ask most Americans, do you have the legal right to own a bazooka? Most Americans, I think, still would say no. Okay? The question is where the line is drawn on those issues. Free speech is no different. No one says, I'm against free speech. No one. Even people who are against it don't say they're against it. They're too stupid to know they're against it. No one says they're against free speech. No one, on the other hand, would be in favor of shouting fire in a crowded theater. There are libel laws. I would argue that the Supreme Court decision saying corporations have free speech rights shows an inability to put proper restraint on their free speech. That's a radically left-wing decision by a radically right-wing court. So, yes, I think that there are restrictions and that there should be restrictions on free speech. The question is, what should they be and who gets to make them? That's where it gets messy. That's where it really gets messy. And as much as possible, in a way, the Supreme Court has really rallied around the First Amendment. A lot of censorship in this culture now comes from corporations. Comes from corporations either censoring news or censoring entertainment. Sometimes they want to protect themselves from the government. That's what the MPAA, the movie ratings are about. That's what even the video game ratings were about. They want to keep the government off their ass. It's what the comic book code in the 50s was about. Industries censor themselves to protect themselves from the government. Then again, you've got almost more than censorship in this culture. A big issue is invasion of privacy, which is related but not the same thing. So it's messy. It's messy business, and I don't have a clear answer as to where that line is. I always love that question because I never know the answer. So I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to call it a night, if there is one more. Does anybody want to be the grand finale here? You got it. I don't know if it's getting tougher or easier. It's more fun than it's ever been. When my finger gets censored, that's not fun. But on the other hand, it's a great story, and I'm grateful in a way that there is censorship because it gives me something to push against and to rail against. I mean, if it goes away, I'll have no show. So I am grateful in that sense. It's not. It's hard to say that it's getting easier or more difficult. I'll tell you, I was talking about this earlier. For me, the big turning point in my career as a performer was 9/11. I was doing up until that point a show that I think was considered kind of edgy, but I was in fact censoring myself in my anti-censorship show. And it wasn't until after 9/11 that I got very, very passionate about two issues. One was censorship itself, because the whole culture tightened after 9/11. There was so much censorship after the days after 9/11 of humor and music and a lot of other things, a lot of fear. And the other thing about 9/11, of course, was the connection between the attacks and religion, how religion played an impact in those attacks. So I got very interested in those two subjects, and I really opened up about them both and decided that I was just going to go full tilt. So, and since then, I have to tell you that as a performer, I feel more alive on the stage, and audiences have been more responsive than ever, because I think that particularly in an environment like this, that when you're talking about an issue like censorship, people want to hear about the real issue discussed rather than some, academic, dissertation. Not that there's anything wrong with that, on censorship and things like that. So on that level, it's a perennially alive issue. So I just want to say to you guys, I really mean it, a New York guy, you'll never find anyone in New York more happy to be in Iowa. You've been such a fun audience, and I just thank you so much for making me feel so at home here. And I'm looking forward to performing tomorrow in Iowa City, and I hope to see you guys again. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Reminder to everyone, there are snacks in the back of the room, so if you have more questions for Joe, you can find him back there and grab some punch and stuff.